I'm Bhavadhir V. Bharadwaj. Welcome to episode 27 of Genesis of Tomorrow. The following is a conversation about science and tech journalism, quantum demographic, physics, education, and more with Miss Cierra Choucair, a deep tech journalist and analyst at the Quantum Insider, founder at the Universum Labs, and the author of the Daily Qubit. Also, 95.2% of you watching this have not subscribed yet. So if you get even the slightest bit of value from the show, please support us by clicking the subscribe button so that we can keep improving the quality of the episodes and keep on bringing such wonderful guests over for you. And now, without any further ado, let's get right into it. Enjoy and thank you. And we are rolling now. Okay, so first of all, again, welcome. And before we march on to the in depth explanations of what the demographic of quantum technology and all of the different matters that we have lined up, what do you do and why do you find it so interesting and intriguing?
Yeah. So currently I'm wearing a few different hats, but honestly, I'm having the time of my life, so it's okay. So currently I work primarily as a quantum journalist and data analyst at the Quantum Insider. The Quantum Insider is actually one vertical under a larger company called Resonance. And at Resonance, we also serve AI, space, and climate industries. So occasionally I do help out on the AI side and hoping to get more into the space side as well because I just really enjoy technology. Um, Outside of that, I also started and write the Daily Qubit newsletter. I am working on building my own company. I'm not really sure what form that will take in the end. I'm just kind of taking it one day at a time and working on things that I'm really passionate about. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
What is the most interesting aspect about tech journalism, and especially more so when you are covering insights and topics
Yeah.
related to such a complex and interwoven field like quantum technology?
Yeah. I find it the thing about being a journalist is you need to have your ear to the ground all the time. You always have to know what's happening in the industry, what's happening in academia, what does the community feel? What does the community feel is most important? Because the part about writing is you're actually here to serve the community. And so it's an act of service. So quantum, you need to be you need to wake up and be all about quantum. And what's great about quantum technology is that it's actually really fascinating. It's a lot different from our reality. So I just find it endlessly intriguing. And there's always something new to learn. I really love that the more that we develop quantum hardware, the more we understand very particular parts about our reality. So we're starting to see a lot of movement with quantum matter and material science. And when we make discoveries in those realms, it feeds back into the development of quantum hardware itself. And so it's a bit like this cycle where we develop hardware, we learn more about our reality, which makes us design better hardware, and so on and so forth. So quantum technology is just really I've loved it from the beginning, but I have also fallen in love with it many times since because it's ever changing and it's just as someone who loves to continuously learn, that's it's just the best place to be because we're still trying to figure out so many different things. So
What are the greatest and the most common challenges that you face as a journalist on a day-to-day quotidian basis?
basis. I think the greatest challenge is probably time management, to be honest. And I think especially yesterday, at the Quantum Insider, we try to cover all of the press releases that come out because that's what we do for the community. We want them to know what is happening on a regular basis. So there's always a lot of breaking news. There are days where nothing happens, of course, but quite often, more recently especially, there are lots of press releases to cover. And I have to say, I have passed up so many incredible research stories this week in pursuit of putting out press releases. And I just wish I had more time to cover everything that's happening because it's really, really interesting. So that's definitely one of the greatest challenges by far. And then as far as what's really incredible about journalism itself is, like I said, it's this act of service. It's curating all of this information when everywhere around us every single day we're always flooded by different sources, and so having the ability to bring everything together in one place and provide it to the people so that they can come to one site and get everything they need to know about the quantum industry is really exciting.
I think journalism, much like every other field, has underwent this drastic evolution of sorts for decades and decades now. And from you, I would like to know what sort of changes is it undergoing right now after the advent of AI application and implementable tools, so to speak.
That's a great
Like
question.
from the very initial process of where you decide to cover what story or not, what topics you want to cover, then into the research process, and then finally publishing your work and how all of that works.
Yeah. Yeah. So AI can be really great for journalism, and it can also be a double edged sword. So it's great in that we can leverage AI tools to find, to automatically pull links into databases for us to go through on a regular basis. So it can kind of help with the curation piece. So we don't have to spend as many hours scrolling through search engines or social media. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn to find different news sources, but we actually have an automated feature that pulls in a lot of those links so that we can easily pick which ones we need to cover. So that's really awesome. In terms of writing, especially when it comes to writing about emerging technologies, AI can be incredibly useful because it can help a lot with the research process. So I often love to cover different research papers within academia, but since I don't necessarily specialize in quantum technology, I cover anything related to quantum technology from sensing, communication, etc. I often need to do additional research in order to fully comprehend what I'm writing about, so that when I write it for my audience, I'm able to write it in such a way that I'm explaining it as I go along, because I'm going to also assume that my audience doesn't know every single detail about quantum technology either, which is most often the case. So AI can be very useful for the research process and checking for understanding. So I love that I can ask it to explain it to me in a way that I, as a person, understand the best. And then I can also use it to repeat back my understanding and check if that's accurate. So AI is great for the research piece. That being said, it's very, very important as a writer that you don't start to use AI as a crutch, because AI can also be wrong. So it's important that it is not the only source of information and that you also have additional places where you can double check your understanding. So great for pulling together what you need to know for an article itself. And then it's also really great for double checking that. Like, I love to put it back in and just double check and make sure everything is as refined and succinct as I could possibly make it before I put it out. So it's kind of like an editor. We don't need as much help from like an editing standpoint, because you can manage a lot of that on your own, which has been really useful for me as someone who's not only a journalist but was writing a daily quantum newsletter as well. I can use that to check for grammatical errors and mistakes like that.
Okay, there are different tangents that I want to take right now, but probably starting off with, as somebody who is talking upon such a complex matter and generally such complex matters, how do you strike that balance between making sure that you are not leaving out the technical nuances of the matter while also making sure that it is accessible to the non-experts in your audience?
That's a really good question. And finding that balance can be difficult, especially when it comes to quantum technology and quantum mechanics, because it's so mathematics, the mathematics and the physics is so relevant. But most people do not speak in terms of mathematics and physics. They need it presented in a different way. So when I write articles that cover research, I try to retain as much as the science as possible. That's actually very important to me, because I think that as someone, the first time I took physics, I actually failed it in university. And I hated the subject for the longest time because I just felt that this is, it's so difficult. I don't understand it. And it turned out that I really was approaching it from the wrong way. I had spent all this time in previous courses. Like, I really loved chemistry. I did organic chemistry and analytical chemistry and physical chemistry. I worked in a chemistry lab. I really loved chemistry. But what I realized is that when I thought about my success with chemistry, a lot of it was related to the memorization of facts. And it was really easy for me to memorize those things and then apply it when I was taking exams or doing homework. But with physics, you can't just memorize facts. You can't just know the equations that play into a system. You have to understand the system as a whole. You have to understand the different forces that are at work and why it makes sense that those would be at work in that system. And so it's a lot of critical thinking. And I think that we don't see enough of that in our schools, or even maybe in just general discourse. So for me, bringing in the science and the physics is actually really important because I want to create more of that. But it's important that I don't make it too dry and I don't make it too dense. So, as someone who also loves to read, I really want to create a visceral experience for my reader. I want to kind of set the scene. I try to do that with the hooks. I really want you to see what I'm thinking. So, if I'm relating a certain physical what have you to something that you might commonly see in everyday life, I want to kind of make that analogy so that you have a better frame of mind from which to interpret everything that's to follow. So I think that the balance exists in maintain the science and the math as much as you can, but be very courteous of your readers and ensure to also make it like paint the picture for them. I think it's really important because you can't see qubits and you can't see entanglement. So we need to have ways in which we can communicate these topics so that the reader has some way to frame it within their reality. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. I on a similar note, for me it was the same thing with maths.
Yeah.
Like I knew that I need maths to be able to go and understand things in the routes of physics, but as well
Mhm.
as AI and all that stuff. But still, there was this very. I was lazy, very honestly. Like, okay, scratching the epidermal layer and thinking I understand the concepts, but not putting in the efforts and hours to do the questions and everything. And
Yeah.
also, I'm terrible at chemistry. I still am, right? But how were you able to overcome that roadblock? Because umpteen times, many people they give up. They are like, okay, maybe this domain, this subject, this field is not just for me.
Yeah.
So, two things. Firstly, what really intrigues you about physics, and what
Yeah.
intrigued you about physics initially? And secondly, how were you able to stick with this very dense subject matter and make sure that slowly but steadily you are able to teach yourself all these matters that people are very intimidated by?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, the reason I always come back to the story of how I failed physics is that this was years ago. I don't want to say how many, but it was years ago, right? And it's still just so important to me because it really represented a switch in mindset for me at the time. And I think that many of us go through that in university as we're kind of coming into adulthood and discovering ourselves. So I actually spent a year thinking that physics was by and far the worst subject ever created. And I wanted to stay very, very far away from it. And a year later, I decided that I needed to overcome this challenge because prior to failing this class, I was a straight A student. Everything I did academically, I wanted to do it to the best of my ability. School was very important to me. And in fact, I feel like I based much of who I was as a person and my personality around I can do school well. That's me. That's who I am. And so failing physics actually felt very, very tough. I was very distraught. And I just felt like, I don't know, like maybe I can't be as successful as I thought I could. When I had taken the course initially, I was actually pre med and I was going for biochemistry. And I had already had this talk with my advisor. He said, Sierra, I don't think you want to be pre med. I think you want to do chemistry, just looking at your schedule. And I was like, you know what? You might have a point with that. So I was thinking about switching to chemistry, and I wanted to really do a lot of research. I was in university on a research scholarship as a freshman, so I got to work in a graduate lab, and it was everything to me at the time. So again, fast forward, sorry, I kind of went back and forth, but fast forward to a year later, I realized that in order to move forward from this failure that I perceived as one of the worst things happening to me up until that point, I needed to find a way to overcome it. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable. And so I started to ease back into it. I didn't want to immediately enroll in the course because I was rather intimidated by it. So I instead started reading books on the topic because, like I mentioned, I'm actually a really big reader. I love books. So I had picked up The Grand Design by Stephen Hawking, and I had picked up Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, which is Richard Feynman's memoirs. I had heard that he was a really well-known and well-loved physicist, so I thought, okay, I'll start with the memoirs because that's a bit easier versus just reading about physics. And the grand design was really, really important to me because it really changed the way I thought about reality. There's this really simple analogy that Stephen made within the pages of the grand design, and he compared humans, the human experience, to a goldfish in a goldfish bowl, a really simple bowl. And so he made the point that goldfish live all day in this bowl. And so when they look out into the world, they see this rather warped image. And to them, that's reality. That's what reality looks like. That's all there is. But we know as humans that reality actually looks much different. And so he was posing the question, what could reality potentially look like if we're actually the ones that are in the goldfish bowl? And so I found that really interesting because I'm a big nerd, and one of my favorite shows was Battlestar Galactica. I don't know if you've seen it, but in it, there's a Cylon robot, artificial intelligence, who is saying he was really, really grateful that he wasn't human because since he was not human, he was able to see things that humans were not. And so that had always really stuck with me as reality as we know it can be really beautiful and it can be also really tragic. But when it comes to really understanding the universe that we're in, there's much that's left to be revealed and uncovered and potentially even outside of our grasp. And I actually find that really beautiful to think about. And so that book really stuck with me. And I was also starting to realize that if I wanted to understand reality in the universe, I had to understand physics because the universe, the language of the universe is mathematics and it is physics, and you have to know those in order to know the universe intimately. And so that really changed how I thought about the subject. I didn't hate it as much anymore. I agreed, okay, it has a value. And then I read the memoirs by Richard Feynman, and reading that really changed my idea of what it meant to be a scientist because I had started to wonder, like, not only am I a woman, minority, et cetera, but maybe I don't fit the mold of scientist. But Richard Feynman was a very eccentric character, and he fit in just fine. In fact, he excelled. And it was his ideas, his way of thinking out of the box, which actually supported him in the success that he had. And so in reading those books, I started to fall in love with the idea of doing physics. And so from there, I started to watch YouTube videos. And then once I felt comfortable that I could start to grasp concepts, I enrolled in a course and I absolutely loved it. I will say the professor the second time around was very enthusiastic about physics, so I think that also helped. But at that point, I went from absolutely hating it to, oh, there's actually nothing else that I would rather spend my time on. So I loved it ever since.
I resonate to that because I think I was talking about the same exact same analogy about the goldfish in the bowl uh, from Stephen Hawking's book and a few episodes back with a guest. And we were talking about this very matter itself. How we might understand reality for what it is, because
Mm-hmm.
that is the know-how that we are limited to.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's on a philosophical note, it's the belief systems that we carry too close to ourselves and the self-imposed limiters on our potential that we fail to remove, or
Yeah.
the potential that we fail to actuate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Richard Feynman, I mean, again, another aspects of his thinking, understand stuff in the language in which you're able to explain it to somebody who is not at all versed with it. That's when you
Yeah.
know that you actually truly understand that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that ties back into the matter, the aspect of your work that you were discussing prior to this. And combining all of it into a specific converged matter, where do you think at whole the field or the spheres of the world of journalism, science communication, and yes, R&D in general, along with industry, are heading towards? It's a
Yeah.
elaborate question, but please, yes, take your
Yeah.
time.
No, I see what you're saying. And I think I'm a bit biased because I'm going to answer this in the direction that I hope it's heading. I hope I'm seeing this correctly, right? I think that in order to bring complex topics to a broader audience, you need more people in the field with very diverse perspectives because there's not one reader out there. There are many readers and everybody's very different in how they take in information and comprehend information. So I think that I would very passionately advocate for diverse voices. And I think allowing people who come from many different backgrounds the opportunity to present their voice and their ideas and how they interpret these different events and developments is very important. Of course, we still need that commitment to science and commitment to the scientific process of observation, experimentation, and interpreting the results. But I think allowing more people to present their takeaway is very important. And I hope that the field of journalism is headed in that direction. Something that I find really interesting. So I was very pure science minded. And at some point, I also started to develop a passion for technology. And it was because of a research project I had worked on that pushed me to pick up technical skills that I didn't feel comfortable with before that. And in in going through the process of teaching myself skills, I realized that technology is actually really amazing because in some ways it levels the playing field. You can go online and you can find many videos on any topic that you're interested in. You can find many different resources to read and credible sources as well. And so I'm really interested to see, can we bring in more voices and can we allow the space to be more open for people who went about learning in a different way. And of course, I'm really biased because my history is I was not able to complete my degree. And as I mentioned, like school is actually really integral to who I was as a person. So I think I've carried that with me for many years and it's always felt very heavy until recently when I started writing about quantum. And what I found was while in physics and academia could feel very gated and very difficult to be taken seriously, um, the quantum community is very interesting because while you still have that kind of we need to be accurate and scientific, it's also very welcoming. It's more welcoming than any other community I've been in, which I never expected to say, because the people who are really into quantum technology are actively helping to move the field forward. And they're all very passionate about it because it's so niche. It just draws very specific people to it. And so I actually felt very welcome and have the entire time felt very welcome in quantum. So my hope is that when I think of all these pieces together, technology is this enabler of allowing people to learn on different pathways and bringing in diverse voices and welcoming communities. I'm hoping that we're getting to the point where we realize that in order to develop technology and develop it responsibly, we have to do it as a team, as a global community. We really have to leverage the global community. And I'm hoping that that's starting to be a more accepted path than the more traditional way of only academic and work done in silos and shutting the gate, and so to speak.
While you were talking about this, there were three three roughly matters that sub matters of sorts that I would love to go a little bit in depth
Yeah.
about. First being the education system at large, and it varies from geography and the demographic and all these different factors. And tell me how it's about there, but here in India, what I personally experienced and feel at large is that when we talk about the education at the high school level, right, the 4 years, things are a lot more focused towards not really developing an in-depth understanding of the matter, but trying to touch upon as many different aspects of a particular domain or subject that's possible. And sure, that is fine, but somewhere
Mm-hmm.
I believe there has to be this balance between the between understanding the thorough technical aspects of it and
Mm-hmm.
touching the diverse range of topics in that particular subject.
Yeah.
For example, I'll take the example of maths, right? I struggled with it not in a sense of being able to fathom what it meant or what was happening, but in the sheer sense of why.
Yeah.
And this is something that I realized when I started studying the university level course of mathematics. It's a lot more, there's a lot more emphasis upon learning the proofs and understanding the whys behind stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
surely that might be a personal thing that I am more inclined towards understanding or catering to. But I think there should be this aspect of understanding why something is happening, teaching people why and how to think than what to think.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it'll, I think, prevent for the most part the initial matter of intimidation that people have, which
Yeah.
actually somewhere to some extent occurs because you aren't in touch with the actual depths of the subject.
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion on that?
I love that. I love that for two different reasons that I really want to touch on. I think first and foremost, again, it makes me think of that experience that I had of going from um, not enjoying physics because I felt like I wasn't capable to falling in love with it. And it was understanding that this is a different way of thinking. I have to apply myself and really deeply understand how this works. How does this system work? What forces are acting on the system? And how can I answer the question? It's not just, oh, I saw this keyword, I'm going to apply this equation, and then I know that this numerical answer is the right answer. Because when you do that, you have no actual connection to the numerical answer. It's sure it's right for an exam, but like you said, like why? Does it matter? What's the significance of that? And so I think that there is a major benefit in approaching science, technology, etc., as far as in an educational manner, from teaching to understand versus teaching to solve an equation. I think there are many, many benefits there. I think that's how you create scientists, really, because you need people that understand the system. And the second piece of this is people come from all different walks of life. And it's our experiences that really create our thought processes, right? I think of it very similarly. The neural network is based off of, the brain. You know that one. So, and it's interesting because there is this post from someone in AI, and he was explaining how he didn't feel like AI scientists were possible because a neural network can only act on the information it has. It can only reorganize information that it has. So it's regurgitating, like generative AI is regurgitating what it already has. And I like to think that in terms of people, the ideas that we come up with are essentially regurgitations of the information that we already have within our brain somewhere. And so when you bring in people from different walks of life and different perspectives, they have different sets of information that they're coming into the problem with. And so they're able to see connections that other people wouldn't have been able to see. And I think that's really interesting. So teaching people how to think critically is important because it gives them a very essential skill. And then also when people start to understand the problem like really intimately and intrinsically, they can start to draw connections from experiences they have in other domains or just from experiencing reality itself. And they get to apply those unique perspectives. And that's how we end up with really novel ideas and innovation. So I love the idea of teaching to understand, because that's how you create thinkers and scientists rather than just plug and play type of scenarios.
You talked about, you followed an unconventional path in the sense that you weren't able to complete your degree, but yet you were able to carve out a career, surely, but more so a place for yourself where you are able to challenge yourself on the levels that you actually want to challenge yourself upon, right?
Yeah.
And I feel this is something that people who, the matter of feeling maybe a little less than others relative to others just because you're following an unconventional path or a path that's just less tread upon than others feel or might go through. For somebody who might be feeling or something like that, or be in a zone similar to that, what would your advice as whole be
Yeah.
to just again carve out a path for yourself?
Yeah. I have two responses to that. And so the first is, like you mentioned earlier, the way that we perceive reality has a lot to do with our own personal philosophy as well. I think that plays a big part of it. And I actually really love, it sounds weird to say, I really love existentialism. I really do. I actually find it very poetic because on the grand scheme of things, the universe is unfathomably large and our daily lives are fairly insignificant. And while that at face value sounds rather depressing, I actually find it really freeing because it means that the things that we as humans worry about, such as what will other people think and maybe I'm not smart enough or good enough, like these things don't actually matter. And so when you're able to frame in your mind that these worries don't actually have significance, you can kind of partition your thinking to kind of set those things to the side and just focus on the task at hand. And if you can do that repeatedly over a long period of time, you can get rather far. And then the second piece I would say is I think that there is a formula to success or to doing well in whatever domain you want to do well in. And the good news is that it's actually very, very simple. And it is, one, you should have a passion, right? Because you want to wake up and work on this problem every single day. I wake up at 3 a.m. local time. I sleep around 10, and I do that every single day of the week. Granted, I have kids, so that plays into why I'm so stretched for time. But I do this literally every single day, and I love it. I love it so much. And so I think you need that passion. The second thing is you need to have patience because nothing big happens in small timelines. You need to do something for a very long time, and this will increase your understanding and give you more experience, and you'll go a lot farther. And then the third part of this is consistency, because it's really easy, I think, as humans, we want immediate results. And so we might do a thing once or twice or 3 times a week, and then we'll get bored of it and we'll move on to the next thing. But the problem is we're never actually developing a solid skill set when we do that. And so if you pick something where you can be passionate, you can be consistent, and you can do it for a long timeline, you will be able to create, I feel very strongly that you can create the path and carve out a space for yourself wherever you want it to be. Because I very legitimately made the decision, I want to do quantum computing. And I had looked at my life and I said, I have two kids. I walked away from a six-figure engineering job. So one, I worked really hard to come from no degree and to get to this engineering position. And then I was very unhappy because while I was doing work that I loved, it wasn't within the domain that I loved. I was analyzing grocery price data, which did not get me out of bed in the morning. And so I always felt I will not be happy until I get back to physics. And so I made the decision to walk away from that. And I thought I can either spend many, many years going back to school to get a formal degree and then go in search of a job, which is a whole, that's very difficult, right? Like, this is not an easy process. Um, or I can say, what if I put myself out there and learn on the go, because I learn better when I'm doing a thing, and see where that takes me. And knowing that since I chose not to do the formal degree route, I had to also be committed to learning along the way outside of a structured program. I kind of create my own curriculum, so to speak. And I've where I am today is so much different than where I was at this time last year. And I'm looking forward to another year of doing this day in and day out. And I can't wait to see where I am next year. But that would be my advice is one, sorry, that was very long and drawn out, but my advice succinctly is one, to ensure that the framework you have helps you to be successful. Remember that there are things that don't matter. What people think, it doesn't matter. Whether or not questions of am I capable, am I good enough, these things don't matter. What matters is that you can show up and do the work. And if you can show up and do the work, then you can do whatever it is that you're very passionate about. So that would be my advice.
This one is a little bit of a more personal question. You do not have to answer it, and we can edit this, chop this part out if you would want. But just out of curiosity,
Why?
being a parent and also being able to become or thrive to become the version of yourself that
Mhm.
continually thrive to become the version of yourself that you in at present believe that you will be proud of someday,
Yeah.
and that is in general just better than who you are today.
Yeah.
Doing those two things simultaneously day in and day out, how does that work? And why I ask that is because
Yeah.
umpteen times there is this recurrent pattern that you observe or that you would have observed in past years, decades, that parents sometimes they just put their own stuff in the back seat
Mm-hmm.
and are completely like, okay, right, kids, let's focus. They become their main project,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is good. But how do you make sure that you're balancing between your kids, this project of yours, very
Yeah.
significant aspect of your life, while also making sure that you are working on these three different projects, side projects, which are entirely and explicitly yours?
Yeah. That is such a good question. And I absolutely do feel comfortable answering it because I think it's really important. And I will say first and foremost that what I have learned in my 30ish years of life is that I'm not really quite sure that balance much exists. I think that there's never a perfect time and there's never going to be a perfect balance. I think that there are seasons for things and you just kind of accept what comes in those seasons. And so I have an 11-year-old, so I spent many years with my dreams on hold. And I wanted to create the best life I could for her. And I did the best that I could every single year. And at some point, I realized that now, as she's getting very interested in math and technology and science, which I just absolutely love, but I realized that in order to be the version of myself that I want to be for her, then I want to show her what is possible for her. And so I feel that working hard, showing her one how to work hard, work ethic is very important. How to stick with something even when it feels uncomfortable, because absolutely I have been in rooms where I feel very uncomfortable and like I don't belong, but I have to continue to show up if I do want to one day belong, right? And so I think that showing her these things, or the art of doing hard things, is very, very important. And I think that showing her that pursuing her passion is very, very important. And now I have a younger daughter who's 2, and I also want to be that. I want to be that for them. I want to be the example. Because what I found myself doing many, many times is I would go in search of scientists or professionals that had a background like me and wanted to do similar things, because I needed to prove to myself, I needed to have evidence that it was possible to get to where I wanted to be. And I found it very, very difficult. Also, because we're all very different and we have different paths. So I don't think that was the right thing to do in the first place. But I want to just provide another example of what is possible. And so that looks like not balanced, because like I mentioned, I actually, there are things that I sacrifice in order to do what I do. So I don't sleep a lot, which isn't recommended. But that's just the situation as it is right now. I don't spend time with friends. I don't go to events like weddings. I don't see movies. Um, I don't do much outside of working, but I actively choose to be in this space, so I'm able to stick with it. And I also recognize that I'm working very, very hard right now in order to get to where I want to be, and that at some point it will start to even out. There will be a season where I'm not working as hard, but that's how I would approach it. I think with parents, like we want to believe that there's balance, but I don't actually think that there's balance. I think we have to make choices that are the best for us and our family at that point in time, and we have to go for it. So yeah.
I agree, especially regarding the balance bit. I mean, people get this wrong
Hmm.
umpteen times. Most of the time, balance
Yes.
isn't related to the amount of input, right? The magnitude of input of it
Yeah.
being equal. It's rather related or entirely dependent, in my eyes at least, in regards to the output. Like for me, a well balanced situation is when I have got three deliverables and a deadline, and I am able to deliver those said deliverables before it's due. Like, that is a balanced situation. If
Yeah.
I am not able to do that, then I'm out of balance, because I've got maybe the deadline for two of them passed. I was only able to turn in one of them. That is
Oh,
an imbalanced situation.
yeah.
Second aspect that I really that just popped into my head was, I have this theory of sorts that you have to have a council of people around you, right?
Yeah.
Your trusted advisor, one, two, three, doesn't matter. You have to have them, right? A parent is a default member of that council for the children. And as you said while you were explaining that your daughter is now, getting into math and science, and you being well versed in those subjects will just be aiding her right now at a
Yeah.
rudimentary level. But especially if, you never know, if they might want to pursue maybe things which are on the same along the same lines or the same paths. I feel then by that perspective also, like, for people who are like, okay, no, kids, I mean, then even by that marker, that barometer, it again becomes your own responsibility to make sure that you are up to date with
Totally.
the stuff that they might be facing in the future, and you're
Mhm.
competent enough to be able to just be a word of advice, be a decent advisor if they ever need one, as a
Yeah.
parent.
I completely agree. Yeah.
But okay, you mentioned way back, a little while back, you're a nerd as well, right? And
Yes.
I think science fiction is a very significant aspect in
Yes.
the entire existence of humanity at large itself, right? It
Yeah.
is where you take bits from your imagination, your wildest and most far-fetched imaginations, and they just try to make it work in a sense that is maybe believable to whatever degree it is. Like when you're watching Harry Potter, you're immersed into it, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that is okay, different matter. Science fiction, right? Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever, right?
Yes.
You there is this notion that you think that okay, this might be possible. Maybe not
Yeah.
now. We might just be limited by the technology of our time, but
Yeah.
years and centuries, maybe, who knows? I mean, we came so far ahead in the past, in just this past century. We do not know what might happen. What, in your opinion, is the significance of science fiction, one, but also fueling your inner imagination at large?
So happy right now. So I will tell you that out of the many people I've spoken to in this space or in related spaces such as artificial intelligence or those who are really interested in the space industry, there are very few people I have talked to that do not read science fiction. So I think that science fiction actually it's clearly very impactful because it creates a lot of people in science. And I think it's definitely that spark that each of us have experienced that, oh, this could be possible in the future. I could help create that science fiction future. I think that it really does spur the imagination, and that is a big part of what draws people to science. And the first part is just it's the possibility. It's not just understanding what we do know, but the inherent state of a scientist is trying to figure out what we don't know. And so you need that imagination. You have to be able to think outside of the box because if we don't already know it about our reality, then clearly it's not very obvious. And so I think that science fiction plays such a big part in this. And I think imagination and creativity are very, very important. Um, so you asked me a second question and I forgot because I was already just like thinking about all these different books that I love. What was your second question?
What are the books that you love?
Oh, so I used to say my favorite science fiction series was Dune. That used to be absolutely like no discussion. That is the best series ever written. And then I read The Expanse, and I actually have not yet started another series because I'm still just like really lamenting the end of the series and also just letting it process because I loved the characters. I loved everything in that book. I don't want to give any spoilers or in those books, but that series was incredible to me. And so those are my two favorite series. I also just picked up, I don't have it in here with me. No, I don't have it in here with me. I just picked up another one that's about some sort of futuristic Chicago and aliens that just sounded really nice and comforting to read on the back end of a series. But yeah, I really love science fiction. And for the record, my oldest daughter is named Ilea after a Star Trek character, one of the first movies ever created in Star Trek. And my daughter Liana was inspired from Game of Thrones because that's just who we are as people. And I love watching sci-fi. Like I mentioned, Battlestar Galactica is one of my favorite series of all time. So, yeah, I think that science fiction is a very common thread amongst people who are also very interested in science.
The second question was just an extension of this. How do you make sure that you are continually and on a regular basis making sure that you're fueling your imagination and creativity?
Great question. So I think as a writer, it's actually really, really important, especially if you want to write in science, to continually tap into creativity. That's where new ideas come from. And I would say at the moment, I'm fairly unbalanced at doing that. I'd like to make more time for reading than I currently do because that is what makes me happy. I love to read and I love to read science fiction. So I do occasionally schedule blocks in my calendar. I live off of my Google Calendar. And I try to find parts in my day where I can just fit in 15 to 30 minutes of reading because that to me feels like it's a gift. It's a thing that I've earned. I just don't always make it to it, unfortunately. But if in my ideal day, I would have plenty of time for reading. And I don't just read science fiction, I also like to read a nonfiction at the same time. So right now I just started The Road to Reality by Roger Penrose. So I love to kind of contrast, like, so start with learning about pure science and math, and then reading science fiction. And then, after a few days of sleeping on it, you start to come up with new ideas. And so that would be my ideal routine. I just don't always get to it. I also try to schedule a block of time where I just write freely in a journal, because that's where I start to kind of piece together things. So writing and reading are very, very important, I think.
Another aspect of the overarching matter of this entire discussion of ours: how do we make the entire STEM diaspora at large more inclusive and ungated, rather? Like, sure, there's an aspect of meritocracy and competence involved, but just purely that.
Yeah, I actually spend a lot of time thinking about this, and part of what I want to do with Universum Labs, my company, is to create tools that promote just that inclusivity, getting everyone involved. Anyone who has ever thought, I want to be a scientist, I want to invite them to do science, because you can do science. You can learn along the way the things that you need to learn, and you can actively contribute to science. And if you're passionate, if you can do it consistently for a long period of time, you have a chance to do something really great. And so I think that in order to move from this place that can feel gated at times, we need to think about, I think it starts with education and resources, because education is important, but there are two things that can often stand in the way of a really solid education. And that is, one, not meeting students where they are. So not teaching in a way that inspires comprehension, because everyone is very, very different in how they learn. And some people require more hands-on experience, and some people require, I like to learn through reading, but my husband, for instance, does not read and needs to learn through visuals. Very, very intelligent, but he just has to learn in a different format. And so he struggled in courses where it was primarily reading, which is unfortunate because he has so much potential. And so I think about that a lot. um, and then I also think about access to resources. So when I say that, I really truly believe that anything we do needs to be a global community involved in it, because it kills me to think that there are people in countries or in places where they don't have access to education and they don't have these opportunities. And yet they're probably so full of innovative ideas, and we might never get to hear them. And so I think that we need to encourage access to resources, and the resources that we provide access to need to be diverse enough that they can reach any learner regardless of how that person best intakes information. And I hope that we as a community are moving towards that.
For people who are coming from a non-traditional and unconventional academic background, what what is your piece of advice for them to be able to, again, find their place in a domain that is a little hesitant to open their doors of opportunities for them?
I think it starts first and foremost with internal dialogue. You have to believe you're capable of it in order to get past any roadblocks that stop you from pursuing it. I say that from a place of experience. I think I spent way too many years telling myself that I wasn't capable, or accepting what other people said about me, to the point where it actually stunted what I was able to do. And so you first have to accept that, if you're willing to put in the work and the time, that you are capable. And so once you have gotten past the challenge of internal narrative, deciding what exactly it is you want to study, know more about, or contribute to, and then actively going out and finding the resources that will help you get there. And so if your goal is to learn more about quantum computing, then look into the many resources that are available. There are some really incredible textbooks out there. There are also lots of videos. IBM, actually, Qiskit puts out a lot of really great tutorials and videos and other educational materials. There are also different platforms where you can try hands-on type of working with Qiskit or Circ, etc. And so I think just choosing how it is you learn best, you know that most about yourself, and then finding those resources and taking the time to learn the subject at hand. I think the other part is understanding what do you want to do with that knowledge once you have it. So last year, I spent a lot of time reading about quantum and trying to understand the industry on a much more holistic level. And now this year, what I'm really focused on is I want to think about, okay, something I'm really passionate about is there's a lot of research being done, but how do we quantify the significance of that research of each individual paper? And how do we compare it to classical alternatives and understand from a resource perspective or a societal impact perspective? How do we start to understand where we should concentrate time, money spent on research so that we can actively move the field forward? So, to sum up, I would say one, believe that you can. It's so important. Even though it sounds really cliche, you really do have to believe that. Two, choose the resources that will help you intake the knowledge you need to get. And then actively think about what questions am I looking to answer and do the work to answer them. And so that if you were to combine all of those things, I feel very confidently that regardless of your background, you would be able to create a space for yourself. And as I mentioned before, parts of this community can be very shockingly very welcome. I've yet to have a really negative reaction. Like, honestly, over the past year, I've spoken to so many people, and everyone's just been very, very open to the idea of someone learning, because we're all learning quantum together, essentially. And so it's kind of a great place to start if you think about it. But you will find other people like yourself, even if it doesn't seem like you will.
Coming back a little towards the matter of journalism, tech journalism, and journalism at
Mhm.
large, before social media became so prevalent,
Mhm.
the sources of information were a lot more streamlined.
Yeah.
And sure, there were pros and cons of it, but if we look at a general overview of it, the credibility of information, or to put it in from another from a different angle, it was maybe a lot more tedious to be able to be, okay, how do I say this without it being political or anything, but it was a lot more tedious to be misguided by the information overload, and as an individual have to spend so much time at distinguishing between what actually is right and factual and
Yeah.
what is maybe a misrepresented version of the actual thing. And now, with so much information,
Mhm.
and which is exponentially growing, by the way,
Yeah.
every second that we speak here right now, and the sheer amount of that conundrum of distinguishing the fake news or the fake information or the misrepresented even to the actual thorough credible ones, like, how do you think that this entire discussion goes over?
Yeah. That I think that's a really big challenge. And I spend a lot of time, I actually really enjoy this topic. I spend a lot of time thinking about that because I come from, or rather, currently, I live in Oklahoma in the US. And I don't know if you know much about Oklahoma, but the dynamics here are interesting in that science and technology are not always widely accepted. In fact, I remember very explicitly in biology, I had a teacher that would not talk about evolution because he said it wasn't real. So we're not going to we didn't learn about Darwin, we didn't learn about any of that. And I thought that can be really frustrating to not get some of that information right. And so I think that the conundrum of misinformation or being misguided is a really big problem in our society, where we are taking in so much information. Because since we are taking in so much information, we have to really pick and choose where we're receiving our information. And so we end up really tailoring our news feeds on every single platform to reinforce whatever bias or beliefs we have. And so it kind of turns into this very perpetual cycle of potential misinformation. And then now with the generative AI, there, of course, are a lot of discussions about being sure that what you're reading is not a hallucination, and ensuring that the images that you see, I cannot tell you how many times I've had a relative send me an image and be like, can you believe this? And I have to tell them that is very clearly AI. I'm so sorry. So I think that misinformation is a really big problem in our society, especially as you mentioned, like information is constantly growing. And so again, I love this. I really want to um, I want to work on tools that sift through information in order to provide really credible resources in one spot, which is also the goal of Universum Labs. It's something I'm very passionate about. It's just, how do you do that? And I really don't know. I don't have a great answer or a suggestion currently. Other than I recognize too that this is a problem, right? Like, we have access to a lot of information, which is incredible, more access than we've ever had. But the downside is we have more access to information more than we've ever had. And it has pros, but it also has cons. And I think about how, I believe it was Nikola Tesla who said that one day we would have devices the size of, our hand, or a pocket, that we could carry with us, and we would be able to know anything we wanted to know at the touch of a button or the touch of an interface. And I actually have to check if that was him who said it, right? Because who knows, maybe that was fake information. But I believe it was him who said that. And it's interesting because he envisioned that we would do great things with that type of power, but instead we are just increasingly overwhelmed with how much, because it's hard to know where to start and what to believe. And it's a lot every single day. But yeah, I don't know if I've really answered your question, other than I empathize with the general sentiment.
No, I mean, surely it. I think you were able to justifiably so put it the entire matter into a little bit more of a clearer perspective. And I think a good start would be just stop having Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts as your primary sources of information.
Yeah,
That would really help big time. Like,
yeah,
do not do that.
yeah. And you'll
But
save a
okay,
lot of time.
surely, I mean, people do not realize how much they do realize. But again, it's a self-imposed rest, self-imposed limiter of sorts again,
Yeah,
that people
yeah.
just keep on continually obsessing over.
Hmm.
But okay, where do you see the entire field of journalism and tech journalism especially evolving in the next decade or so?
It's a great question. I think I actually have a coworker who has presented this idea, which I think is really interesting. And he believes very strongly that we will eventually have, instead of going to different sites and finding information or scrolling social media, that we can instead just get very personalized news feeds sent to us in one spot on a daily basis to review. And maybe we'll receive our information like that, which sounds really convenient, but it also worries me because, like I said, it can be very easy for us to, when we start to personalize the information we take in, we start to also reinforce any biases we might have. And we might never see other perspectives that encourage us to think outside of the box. So I could see, with the development of AI, having more tools like that with that potential. And I worry that news feeds and information sources can become too tailored for the reasons I mentioned. And then on the other hand, I also recognize that the more we're exposed to these very overwhelming flows of information all the time, the more we start to feel overstimulated and we start to seek out comforts like reels and TikTok videos and just really sink into how easy it is to scroll and kind of numb yourself to the fact that there's so much information that I could be missing at any point in time. And so I'm not really sure where I would see it at the end of 10 years. I think it can go one of two ways. I think it can become more organized, and I think that that has its ups and downs. And then I also think it could become increasingly overwhelming. And then I worry about how many people will actively be doing things that matter as opposed to maybe the doom scroll. And I think that's a tendency in all of us. I know for me last year, at the end of last year, I went from performing where I wanted to perform to I ended up creating like I have some like I've built a network on LinkedIn, and so then I got LinkedIn became this very important part of my day to the point where I realized my day was I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm not actually doing anything that I want to do, or I'm not doing enough of it. And so I've had to really take a step back and tell myself that LinkedIn does not define my success and I shouldn't live on LinkedIn. It's good and it's useful and it's a way to build your network and get your ideas out there, but you have to be able to self impose limits and be very self aware of when your time starts to bleed too much into the doom scroll and less into the actual work at hand. So I'm not sure where we'll be in 10 years. I just hope that we as people can start to recognize the potential of information overload to inhibit the things that we want to do and start to put in that can make your own discipline, so to speak.
There's this final segment that we do on the show. Sierra, what is your word to humanity at large?
Wow. My word, one word.
Your message to
Oh,
humanity
my
at large.
message. Oh,
Hmm.
okay. That helps. Okay. I was like, oh, I have to pick one word. I like too many words. Um, I would say that if you go to my website, I think you'll see this pretty large, but I think that science and discovery, the process of discovering the world around us is integral to who we are as human beings. And I think that regardless of our philosophy or religious preference, I think that the one thing that is central to all of us is that we were made to discover the world around us. And so it is my hope that we really lean into what we're passionate about and actively work to experience and discover reality for our life. Like spend your life doing that. And I feel that that's happiness doesn't need to be complex. It can be very, very simple. It can be that simple. So that would be my message.
Miss Cierra Choucair, thank you so very much for being on the show. Personally, it was a lovely conversation.
It's
Loved
great
it,
to be here.
and it was really informative in in the sense of being able to provide perspectives, varied perspectives to people who will be tuning in. I think that should be the objective of any such podcasts or anything, just to be able to provide a perspective at large.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a
So
pleasure to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
thank you.